Michael was out of options. And knowing that his father had a penchant for hiding valuable things in walls, considered one last desperate gambit.
This is crazy. What am I doing?
Using a hammer to try to...
Are you crazy?
Are you blue?
Only in color, Michael. Only in color. It seems I might have stumbled upon an acting opportunity.
As a member of the Blue Man Group?
Oh no, you're thinking of the support group. I made that same mistake myself. They're called the Blue Man Group.
Did it feel a lot more freeing than other, like, the previous sitcoms you worked on to work on Arrested Development?
No, because we always felt we were about to get fired.
Oh
yeah,
the last hurrah.
Yeah, no. The network wouldn't. We never got like, the show's really funny. We got like, you're 8 minutes over. We'll let you be 2 minutes over in your first cut, but you can't be 8 minutes over. And they were, I get it. Like I never felt that they, when the show got awards, that's what saved us. It's like, well, we won Best Comedy. You can't cancel a show that's just won Best Comedy. Although they tried. They definitely tried. My name is Jim Vallely. Maybe you've enjoyed some of the shows I've written, like Golden Girls and Arrested Development, and maybe you haven't. Hey, Harmon, let's get to work.
Yes, that is Jim Vallely, who was a writer and producer on the iconic comedy show Arrested Development, which he earned an Emmy. And he is our guest today on Comedy History 101, where we school you in comedy. I am Harmon. Hello. Jim, as you recall, or not recall, Jim is our guest today, and besides working on Arrested Development, he was a writer for The Golden Girls, 2.5 Men, The John Larroquette Show, and he got his start on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson with his comedy duo, The Funny Boys. So today we are going to do a masterclass deep dive with Jim on comedy writing, producing, and what it was like to have Larry David as a neighbor. But before we jump into the episode, a quick plug. On July 15th, Tuesday, at Pete's Candy Store in Brooklyn, I wrote a play. It is called The Roast of Graham Parsons. It's a dark comedy musical featuring one of the most debauched stories in rock and roll history. Yeah, and you can find out all about my shows on my site, harmonleon.com, or follow me on Instagram at harmonleon. Also, show some support and love for Comedy History 101. Give us a few stars and a splendid review on iTunes or on our site, Comedy History 101. And we are going to keep this intro short and jump into the episode. So, without further ado...
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
I'm trying to use the phone!
Comedy History 101.
Hello. Jim, how are you?
How are you?
Good. It's been a while. I think Jokey Okie might have been one of the last times I saw you.
Jokey Okie.
Stand-up comedy karaoke.
Who can forget? Still a great idea. Still an amazing idea. Are you still doing it?
I brought it back, I did it. Okay, check this out. I did it a couple years ago. I was asked to do 12 shows of it at SF Sketchfest, where it was off in the closet. And through that, I did the Kennedy Center.
Oh, wow.
And then it went away. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'm doing a tic-tac joke now.
Yeah. What's that?
I just made it up. It's just...
You do okie jokey.
No, it's tic-tac joke.
Tic-tac joke, yeah.
Are we recording?
Yeah, it's all...
We're up and running. Oh, my God.
This is all cinema verite, where all this extraneous pre-talk is actually the ramble leading into it. It's, kind of one of those tease sort of openings.
Yeah. What we're really like, what we're, when the mask is off.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm out in New York. This is Comedy History 101. Your comedy history is East Coast, because didn't you grow up in New
Jersey?
Brunswick?
Yeah, well, East Brunswick. I was born in New Brunswick, and was born a long, long time ago, 70 years ago, believe it or not. Oh, wow. And somehow, I graduated high school in 72, and I got into NYU. But after I went to county college for a couple of years, because the idea of like in like the early 70s, of like, I'm going to go into show business. Oh, it's just And, my mother did everything she could to keep me out, including hiding my acceptance letter from NYU.
Were you in the acting department there or the film department or writing?
I studied with Stella Adler, one of the great acting teachers, the Stella Adler. And she would come into her room. She had a throne on her little stage there, and we all had to stand up. And it was very, very, insane. As a matter of fact, there's a good documentary about Stella Adler and an American Masters. And I'm looking at this documentary and I go, yeah, this is a city center, her little studio there. And then I realized, oh, wait, I was in this class. I'm such a pothead. I forgot that, like, I had to sign an NDA. I'm like looking at Jodie Price, who's like Lonnie Price's sister, doing the scene. And then, of course, I was so young when I was in the acting class. You don't get anything out of it when you're 18 or 19. Nobody can teach a 19-year-old kid anything. And I looked at it, I go, boy, I went back and she had written a thing called, what was it called? It was a sort of a master class in script interpretation. And it really gave me the basis on how to write something. Because it was like, all the actors, all this stuff, like an actor needs an action. Why are they there? A lot of the times, and she was coming from more of a theatrical point of view, but she goes, yeah. A lot of times characters are in rooms and, they're just there a maid is just there to pick up the phone. But, you've got to put another reason. What does that person want all the time? And when I'm writing, I'm always, I'm not like a great writer, but I'm like, okay, what do they want?
Wait,
well,
you won an Emmy. That's pretty good. Well, don't undersell yourself.
Well, I got lucky on, it's a really a bit of a crapshoot out here as to what shows you get put on, and knowing when you're on a good show. And I was lucky, because you really learn on your first shows. Like the first big show I did was Golden Girls. And you really learn, like, if you've written a bad joke, if B. Arthur can't get a laugh with your joke, you've written a bad joke. But if you're writing for, I don't know, I'll just pull it like Tony Danza. Tony Danza takes a bad joke and he turns it into a Tony Danza joke. He also takes a good joke and he turns it into a Tony Danza joke. So, and Tony Danza's whole thing was like, he was like a walking laugh track for his own lines. He would do his line. That was just in the lobby. You kind of laugh at it. It's a little trick, But I learned it's like, okay, yeah, that's a good joke. Why didn't that joke work? And so that was a real college for me those couple of years.
What about, though, just going back to actual college? When did you start with the Funny Boys, which was your first? Was that your first? Did you go solo?
Yeah,
like
because now I never went solo. I found myself, I was a young dad, a beautiful daughter, and who also works in the industry. But we found ourselves living in this building in Manhattan called Manhattan Plaza, which was for actors and writers. It was kind of amazing. It was on 42nd Street, and they were these luxury buildings that went up. Somebody thought people would want to live on 42nd Street in the late 70s, where you have nothing but prostitutes and drugs. It's just, but
yeah,
these two buildings went up. Right, exactly right. It was the Deuce. And I think this building is even mentioned in the Deuce, because they put these buildings up and no one wanted to rent there, so it went over to HUD. They took over, and Estelle Parsons, a great actress, said, I know a group of poor people who would love to live in a theater district. They're called actors and writers. And so we got in, and that was like big for me because, down the hall lived Larry David, and across the hall from Larry lived the great Kenny Kramer, who was Samuel Jackson was our security guard. Whoa. And there were nothing but actors and writers all around you. And that really got me into, okay, I needed something to do at night. So I called up a guy who I went to NYU with, Jonathan Schmock, very talented actor, and he could do voices and whatnot. And we had done some stuff like cabaret stuff, but we decided to give it a shot. And, we were at Catch Rising Star in the comic strip, and they flew us out, and we auditioned for NBC. It was a big deal, and
What club in New York was the first time you got on stage?
probably the comic strip.
Okay, still there. It's still not.
Oh yeah. Seinfeld passed us. He was like the house MC.
Oh wow.
And then we got a Catch a Rising Star. And that's where I became good friends with Bill Maher. And you get your group of guys. I would say like early '80s was a good group of comics. That we all kind of Paul Reiser and Seinfeld and Larry Miller, and just and we all kind of came out here at the beginning of the television sitcom craze. That was just timing. Timing is a big part of it.
Yeah, what was it like in those early days of New York? Was it a pretty close knit group? Because here it's like every bar has about 10 different shows, and that's just like one bar. Like my block has about 8 different venues that do some sort of comedy night.
It was a small group. I would say, Catch, Comic Strip, Improv, and then the Comedy Cellar joined like 84, 85. And there were maybe 80 or 100 comics, and so it was a very small group of people, and we all got to know each other because we all did gigs. We did the one-nighters and college gigs together, and everybody kind of knew, and there was a real camaraderie to it. Of course, a camaraderie covering seething hatred, jealousy, anger. Why him? Why not me? But you learned how to like pretend to be happy for your friends when they got their Tonight Show spot, because that was the goal back then.
Well, then it's just like, okay, you have just the three networks, and you have the one Tonight Show. So it's just like when someone gets a Tonight Show, it's just like
it's a career changer. Yeah, it was a career changing thing. Yeah.
And at what point in your stand-up career, like how many years in, when you got on the Tonight Show, which I just watched the 2 clips yesterday?
It's always nice when we have comedians, especially new comedians who have not appeared nationally before, to come out and have an audience like we have tonight, because it helps them. There are 2 young fellows who got started at a place called Catch a Rising Star in New York. They work frequently at the Improvisation in Hollywood. Their names are Jonathan Schmuck and Jim Vallely, and they bill themselves as the Funny Boys. Here they are.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We are the Funny Boys. Our real names are Jonathan Schmuck and Jim Vallely.
My partner, Jim Vallely.
Thank you. As you can tell by our straight blonde hair, we've had very hard, very difficult lives. Yes. In the ghetto where we were born, life was tough.
We got in, we'd probably been doing it for 3 or 4 years. I think, we did it for a year and then took some time off to reevaluate and then got back into it. And that second time that we got back into it, we got a little more serious. And then we just got lucky. We did a show at a place called Green Street downtown, and we got great reviews. And, literally the next day, within like a month, we had an overall deal at NBC and did a television series, did a pilot, did a pilot with Jessica Walter. Yeah, in '84. It was different back then. I mean, it almost, if you look at a lot of, certainly like the sitcoms from the '80s, they almost look like, public access. So
yeah, like I'm a huge fan of opening credit sequences on '80s sitcoms.
Oh, you got to look at.
Thus, it was a treat when I was researching and watching Double Trouble.
Double Trouble is definitely one.
It always has this one where they're talking and then they look at the camera.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there was a formula, and you had to follow that formula. The pilot that Jonathan and I did, this is how corny it was. It was like '84, and the premise was we were 2 guys, 2 friends, who just got out of the army, and and one of them decides to go to nursing school. Me, I decided to go to nursing school, and it's so weird because I'm a male nurse. It doesn't exist.
It's like, what? He's a man and a nurse? What?
So
What's going on here?
it was great. And of course, Jonathan, he just likes to, he go, whoa.
47, 48, 48, 49, 49. That's 50. Take a rest. Oh. Are you sure this is how Richard Gere got girls in American Gigolo? Positive. We're professional escorts. A professional escort has to be obsessed with his body. Didn't you read the pamphlet? I read the whole thing. We'll see about that. What's rule number 7? Rule number 7. Always compliment your date's most appealing feature. Example. As I recall, good Queen Elizabeth also had very little hair.
And Jessica Walters, the stern dean, as if they just made up this world that doesn't exist, that nurses live in a giant nurse college with deans of nursing, and they all have to be virgins to be nurses. But the show was good enough that, they put us on another show, and we did one day at a time, but it was like a big deal. It's like you would do a show and then, 15, 20 million people will have seen it. And, you were kind of like, we were well known for about a month, I would say, because they canceled Double Trouble, and then they put it back on in reruns, which they don't do anymore. Once a show is canceled, it's canceled, because our show, they put it on a different time, on a different day. They put it on after The Facts of Life on Wednesdays and reruns, and we became like the number 2 show in the country. And they desperately wanted to, bring the show back. But the twins didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah, and also I researched the twins.
Oh, they're
hard-working director.
Oh my God! Well, Liz,
Son of Anarchy and shows like that.
Well, yeah, they're just amazing. Jeannie is a director. I worked with her on 2.5 Men not recently. That's 10 years ago. And Jeannie and Liz, wrote for Sons of Anarchy, and we were pretty close to those girls. Those girls are amazing.
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
And then at the same time, you were still doing like touring and doing sets at that Comedy Store. Yeah. What was that crazy early days of the Mitzi Shore, early 80s, like Comedy Store? Would it be like you get bumped by Richard Pryor or things like that? Or
actually, Richard Pryor, the first time I played the Comedy Store was the audition for Brandon Tartikoff, who ran NBC, and there was a mistake because Richard Pryor was doing the original room that night. He was performing there, and he was sitting in the back. And the Comedy Store, it's a small room, and we had never gotten in. But they said, "Listen, there's 2 acts that we want to see," and so Pryor went to Tartikoff. Yeah, okay, these 2 acts can go up. Pryor says so. The other act went up, did very good. We had to follow the other act. We did okay, and then Pryor came up on stage and turned to Brandon Tartikoff and said, basically, we were hard acts to follow. He used a little more colorful language, and it wasn't true at all. He used Richard Pryor. What had happened was, when you have a star sitting in the back of Richard Pryor, the act isn't looking at you. They're looking at Richard Pryor to see where's he going to go.
Is Richard?
They don't want to see. Yeah, that's right. And the other act, of course, was Jim Carrey.
Yeah, there you go.
And so he got, but we got overall deals. And I think maybe because of Richard Pryor, because he was just such a gentleman to us, because he knew he was splitting focus. He knew that we weren't getting the performance that we deserved because he was sitting in the back, I've made all this up in my head. I'm attributing. It was a big deal in like 1984 to get it. It changed our lives. I mean, we got like enough money to move out here because that's the hardest thing.
So you were still living in New York at the time when you got in whole trouble, or in community back and forth, or
we flew out for the deal. I mean, for the audition, we got like enough money to move out here, get an apartment. So yeah, that was within a month we were out here, and then they gave us a TV series. They gave us a pilot. So.
And were you guys like on the road? Were you like road comic and the whole just circuit thing?
Yeah, well, we were lucky because, there was that big war between the Improv and the Comedy Store. And we were doing both. And then Mitzi Shore who ran the Comedy Store, got a hold of it. And she called us up. Luckily, I was prepared because she was like, I hear that you're working at the Improv. I won't do the impression. I hear that you're working the Improv. And you got to choose one or the other.
All right.
I said, well, could you give us twice as many spots like in the original room? Because we are 2 people, And, we're not like the Three Stooges or Abbott and Costello, We don't live together. We don't sleep together. We don't finish each other's snores, And I said, and I go, and I have a kid. And she goes, that got to her. And she said, okay, you can, you can play both clubs.
And then how long did you guys stay together? And Jonathan, again, for comedy history fans who are the listeners, we love him as the snooty maitre d' in Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Hello, may I help you?
You can sure as hell try. Hi, I'm Abe Froman. Party of 3 for 12. Is there a problem?
You're Abe Froman.
That's right. I'm Abe Froman.
The Sausage King of Chicago.
Yeah, that's me.
Listen, young man, entre nous, I'm very busy here. Why don't you take the kids and go back to the clubhouse?
Are you suggesting that I'm not who I say I am?
I'm suggesting that you leave before I have to get snooped.
Yeah. Actually, John Hughes liked us. And we were supposed to be in Ferris Bueller's Day Off as do you remember, there's a couple of guys who take the car out.
One is the guy from, what's his name? Richard Edison from Jim Jarmusch's Stranger Than Paradise, who also was in Good Morning Vietnam.
TMI.
Yes. This is comedy history water.
Well.
But yeah, totally.
And by the way, they shot like 20 minutes of those guys. The car has a whole adventure in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, right? But they didn't use it because, it's like, we don't need it. We got this, lightning in a bottle with, Matthew Broderick. They want us to be the valet guys, but, they wanted to go another way with it. And they said, so there's only one role left. And Jonathan for the maitre d'. And I went, well, I can't act. Jonathan, please. And I'm really glad he did it because it was really, and then they put us in another John Hughes movie. We have a small part in Some Kind of Wonderful, where we actually are car valets. I guess John just thought we were good car valets.
Yeah, that he was working on his next movie.
Yeah, right.
Car valet.
Car valet. But, well, actually, this is totally true. And he said, I'm thinking, this is how far back it was, because when we met him, he wasn't John Hughes yet. I met him when he was in the ADR session for 16 Candles. So, I think he had written Vacation, and I think he had written Mr. Mom, but I think that was his first directing job, was 16 Candles, and that's when they really saw that this guy just was amazing. And then he said to us at one point, I have an idea for like two guys who meet. He liked comedy teams, and he thought that we were going to be the next big comedy team. So he clearly wasn't always right about everything. But he basically pitched us planes, trains, and automobiles. But by the time he got to that, it was like, well, I can get Steve Martin and John Candy. So.
Wow. And then you worked with such icons. And one cred that I think is very cool is you worked on Michael Nesmith's TV
television parts. Yeah. That was part of that first NBC deal that we had. Yeah, that was a show that was, the proverbial ahead of its time. He wanted to do, and it's worth seeing. I think you can get them on something called Dr. Duck's Medicine Sauce or something like that. But I actually met quite a few people. John Levenstein, who would go on to write with us on Arrested Development. A lot of guys from that show. A guy named Bill Martin, who wrote Harry and the Hendersons, and it was comedy videos. That's what he was into. That was interesting. That was like the first time I actually had to sit down and write something that wasn't like for the act. Because I never thought of myself as a writer. I just got there out of need.
Yeah, and just to segue into like from going to stand up to writing, what skills did you learn just that you could pass on to people starting out in stand up that you learned from stand up that were applicable, from everything from writing on a TV show to producing?
Boy, there's you just have to find your comedy voice, and I guess that kind of means practicing it all the time. It's probably changed. Probably the talent that I possess, which is I can say a line really quickly, loudly in a room and cut through everybody else. And I might get there a half a second earlier, but those half a seconds add up. And that's a way of getting the boss home earlier. So I only can think about comedy because, rewriting is really important. Being able to make yourself laugh is really important. Really not caring is important. Getting used to failure. Failure should be just like a comfortable shawl that you constantly wear with you. Know that you're going to get rejected 99.99999999% of the time. That's, you just have to develop your voice. And I think that the best thing that you can do to exercise that muscle, for me, is just try to crack jokes, when appropriate, if you can, kind of find out, who your audience is. Everybody's got like a different sort of level of humor that they like. And I don't even want to say level like it's a up or down thing. It's more of a linear thing. But, some people like their comedy physical. Some people like it clean. Some people like puns. I'll never understand those people, but I can make a pun. I can like a pun. If you're going to do comedy, it helps become a funny person. Now, that's all that helped me. I know a lot of comedy writers that aren't funny in real life. Quite a few of them. All of them. I have found that what has kept me working is the ability to be in a room and also to be positive too. It is a little race that we all have when we're looking for a line on your market set joke, somebody get it. And when somebody else gets there, it's important to go, you won. And also don't pitch after a joke has gotten in. Write your joke down and pray that the joke that got in dies. So you have the one behind it. That's my general advice. I did nothing right. I did not do the traditional way of getting into a writer's room. I never had any illusions that I would get into a writer's room. That was like, you had to get to Yale or Harvard, those guys. I never said this is what I want to do. But when as soon as I got there, I was like, this is what I
want to do. Yeah, can't do. It was the Golden Girls. Was that the first time you were actually like in writer's room and script?
Basically, yeah, that was like the first big one, and and I was totally broke. I had like no money. Jonathan's acting career had taken off, and so we hadn't worked in a few years together amiably, and so I was incredibly desperate. I was 34 years old, and I had no money, and nothing really lights that fire like having no money. You get a do or die moment. I had a 2-week option on the show because they were going to see me for 2 weeks. And
was it an agent that brought you into the show, or was it just people you knew? Or
no, the great Don Rio, who was the producer of the Double Trouble Twin show, and on set I would always add lib lines. Hey Don, I got a joke. Then when we stopped, Jonathan and I didn't want to do it anymore. I was working for a while, but the show I was on as an actor got canceled. It's called Hard Knocks, starring a guy named Bill Maher. And then it was produced by Chris Thompson, who had done Bosom Buddies, and he was a good mentor and important part of my life. But after Jonathan and I didn't work together for about a year, I started a rumor when I was writing. I was just telling, because people, that awful thing when you're not working and nothing's happening, but you have to go to the club and, put on your brave, everything's going great, right? Face. And people were saying, what are you doing? I'm writing now. I'm writing. Yeah, I'm writing. And then one day I get a call from Don. He goes, Jimmy, I hear you're writing now. And I said, oh, yeah. And he goes, come on in. He did a show with Brian Keith. Yeah, you remember the sullen, mean, face-tugging, angry method actor, Brian Keith, who always, for some reason, got put in comedies. He's like the least funniest guy in the world. He's like...
Well, you need the straight man foil.
Yeah, but it was the same producers as the Golden Girls. Is it with Thomas? So Don puts me. I'm the only writer on the staff. It's a very low budget show, and Don and I are working on it, and then we go into the booth, and that's where Paul Witt and Tony Thomas, Witt Thomas, are. And at this point, this is like mid '80s, like '87. They've got Golden Girls, they've got Empty Nest, they've got they're really at the top of their game. And I'm making them laugh. I go, if I can make these guys laugh in the booth, maybe they'll ask me on Golden Girls, right? And of course, the show gets canceled. So I'm sitting in my little cubbyhole office. I got this tiny little closet of an office, feeling sorry for myself. I, light up a big pour me joint and look at this joint. And Paul Witt just comes into my office, $5,000 suit, looks at me. I got the joint in my hand. I look at him. I said, "Well, you just thought I was funny?" And he goes, "We're going to have you back." And that's how I got the job on the Golden Girls.
I'm trying to use the phone!
But it's a very unorthodox way of doing it. Because I remember there was a couple of months between that joke that I made and Golden Girls. And I did have an agent who said, "Did you want to write a script, a spec script of the Golden Girls that we could submit to them?" And I said, "Why? So I can, tell them I don't know how to write a script?" No, I'll take my chances. And then I actually did kind of a ballsy thing. I said, "But set up a meeting." And I set up a meeting with Paul Witt and Tony Thomas. And they let me in. And, "Jim, how are you? Good to see you." And I said, "Listen, about 3 or 4 months ago, Paul said, we're going to have you back." And they go, yes. I go, "Yeah, well, that's the meeting." They just cracked up. They just thought, I go, that's what I got for you. And they left. And like a couple of days later, I got a call to come and do Golden Girls. What next changed my life?
Was there different levels of like writing, like when you first start, like jump into like a show?
Yeah, no. You start as a staff writer. Like there's there's about 20 episodes of Golden Girls where my name is somewhere in the credits, but it always doesn't represent what you bring to the show and whatnot. And right away, I had the voice for that show because my mother was like a Golden Girl. All you have to do is can you be mean and sarcastic and talk like an old lady? Yeah, it's my wheelhouse. So I just lucked into there. And also there's this don't ever underestimate what being broke can do, because I have found over the years that people who have reached some success, it's harder for them to get going, and especially if you've had success, because once again, it's very hard to go back to hearing no. Nobody likes to hear no. Me, I love it. I hear it all the time. Would you say no to me?
So last episode, I interviewed Joel Thurm, who was the casting director or Golden Girl.
Well, Joel Thurm was in that. He was at the Comedy Store. It was Joel Thurm, Warren Littlefield. Yeah. Joel Thurm gave me that deal. I love Joel Thurm.
Yeah, what he said was the rest of the cast didn't like Betty White.
That's not true. There's zero truth to that at all. That's, I love Joel Thurm, but he wasn't on the show. He cast the original one. And I think he tells a story about B. Arthur one day saying, referring to Betty and there certainly there just was animosity between B and Betty at some times, but I think it was more of a clash of styles. Betty was a performer, B was an actor. And, Betty, knew some tricks. Maybe Betty wasn't the best actress in the world. B was a great actress, and a great comedic actress. And like I say, Betty was a performer, but the audience loved Betty White. They always loved Betty White. I don't know what that conflict was between them. It was there. It was light. Nobody took it seriously. I don't think they took it seriously. But, I was on the show for, about 95 episodes. And you can't, there's no other definition of professionalism than what those women could do. This is when the shows were like 24 minutes long. That's an extra 2 minutes of dialogue. Very little guest cast. Those women were on camera all the time, and they weren't as old as people think they were. They were basically in their 50s, early 60s. But we would do like a live show at 5 o'clock, I think 4 o'clock on Fridays. You wouldn't stop. You would just go through it. You tape it, but you just go through it. And mistakes, somebody had a mistake. You would just go, wait, line, and then and they would do that, right? And then we'd all have dinner. And they would get their notes in front of everybody, because everybody it was a quicker way of doing it. If you're going to change a line, you have to let everybody know at the same time, and we're all together having dinner, which was kind of a sweet way of doing it. I haven't worked on any of the shows or any company that did that, but it was a great way of doing it. But you're also giving your actors acting notes in front of the entire, cast and crew. I remember once, B hardly ever got line readings, right? And this was during the Wayne's World. Remember Wayne's World? They had that great show, Not, right?
Yeah.
Of a Not, and everybody was doing a Not rip-off joke. They would just do Not somewhere, right? That was the joke that year. But the thing about the Golden Girls is we could do it like a year later, and it would be like, yeah, the old ladies just got this reference, right? I had written this script, and I gave B. Arthur a Not joke, right? And it was something along the line like, she says to Betty, oh, and Rose, I think that you're the smartest, most intelligent woman I've ever met. Not. That was the joke, right? So she does the first one, right? And B does it. And I think you're the most intelligent woman I've ever met. Not. She screams. I fall out of my chair. I think this is the funniest thing. And the showrunner was Mark Sotkin. And Paul, I knew Paul was the, because we all watch it in the booth, like away from the actors. And Paul goes up, let's get that, one on the night show less, Now,
bring it down.
So poor Mark Sotkin's got to give the note, right? And B didn't get a lot of notes, right? So it's like, okay, B, page 30, the Not joke. Yeah. Really funny, B. Really funny. We love it. So good. Hey, maybe this next time, let's take it down a little bit. Because okay. Before the show, I go down to get a little muffin or something at the craft service, and I see B there, and I muster my courage, and I go, hey, B, I just want to tell you, I go, I love the way you did the Not joke. And she says, yeah, well, so did I. And then Mark Sotkin cut my balls off. That's my favorite BZ story. But, she was, that show was just, we were just so lucky to be working on that show. Just so lucky to be working on that show. Learned a lot.
And you mentioned like some of your comedy heroes or shows that were very influential to you, one of them being the Dick Van Dyke Show. And you actually got to work with Carl Reiner.
I did get to work with Carl Reiner, and this is kind of interesting. Well, everybody got to work with Carl Reiner. He was great. But, when I was a kid, I guess the one thing that did unconsciously prepare me for a job writing this was, and when I was 12 years old, I got sick, and I stayed home from school for a year, right? So I was watching a lot of television, and kids didn't stay home for school, But in the morning, they would have all these sitcoms on, and one of them was Dick Van Dyke. So you get to see him like 5 nights, like right at, and after a while you begin to see, oh, there's a pattern here. I'm getting it. But I just saw all these shows. But Dick Van Dyke, of course, was my favorite because it was like, wow, can you imagine?
Well, it's a writer's room.
How do you get that job?
Yeah.
And it was just so far away, right? But, but I knew all the names. I knew Carl Reiner. He had a lot to do with that, and he played Alan Brady, of course, and Alan Brady, the egomaniacal Caesar-like host of the show. And his character, Alan Brady, was just he was a cocksucker. He was a mean guy, right? So I'm doing this show I'm doing 2.5 Men, and he's on it. And of course, all the writers are like, Carl. And Carl is very nice to the writers. He comes in Monday, great job. Oh my God, the script is amazing. This is so good. He's so nice, right? And just very complimentary. And so we get into the Friday night taping, and we're having dinner. And I go, this joke on page whatever doesn't work. Let's come up with something better for Carl. And it's just one of those Box Canyon jokes you can't get out of. I pitched something kind of lame. And it was, okay, yeah, that's better, right? The joke was about, Carl Reiner was like, he was like about 95 at the time. And somebody said, what about Saturday? Can you demand? And he goes, no, it's my mother's birthday. That was the joke, right? Birthday party for something like that. So, but now it's like 9:00 at night. And somebody goes running in the new joke for Carl at 9:00 at night. Carl's not quite so nice, he's a little like grumpier. And he was like, what's this? And he goes, mother? No. It's too much of a thinker. And then he goes, let me rephrase that. It's not a thinker. It's a stinker. Okay, what the fuck are you guys doing? Jesus Christ, it's 9:00 at night. And all the other writers are packing up. Except me, I'm standing there because I know this is all for me, right? And basically, Carl Reiner leaves and Alan Brady appears, and he's like, God damn it, Jesus Christ, let's go with the goddamn joke we have. What are you throwing stuff like that?
So you felt like you were in the middle with...
I got my dream. I'm standing there from the stand, and all the young writers are gone. I go, no, this is part of the job. Yeah, you're right. It's a stinker. It's a stinker. But that was sort of like a little dream come true. And this is why I think I'm happy about it, because no matter how, who you are, as you get older, the opportunities shrivel up. Not so much for Carl Reiner, but Carl Reiner is like, he has to be nice all the time, because you don't want to hear that Carl Reiner isn't nice. And Carl Reiner is nice all the time. But it's really hard to be nice all the time. And when you're the boss, one of the good things about being the boss once in a while is you get to say, what the fuck, And so I felt that I helped with my lame, terrible joke. I helped give Carl Reiner maybe one of his last moments of publicly being mean to writers, because I think he was really a lot like Alan Brady in some ways. I don't know. I didn't know the man, but yeah.
And then you also worked with Jerry Lewis. Was Jerry Lewis, when you worked with him, was he like, hey, lady Jerry Lewis, or is he king of comedy Jerry Lewis?
He was king of comedy Jerry Lewis. Well, I was very, very close to Richard Belzer. And it was just a dear friend. And one day, and he loved Jerry Lewis. And one day he called and said, Jerry wants to meet you. They're doing a musical version of The Nutty Professor. He wants to meet you. You got to go down to San Diego and meet him on his yacht.
Whoa.
And so, great,
Well, just a quick question. Was his yacht named after one of his movies, or I picture his yacht just
called or something?
Or the Jerry Lewis.
I have no idea what the yacht was called. It wasn't exactly what you would call like a Jeff Bezos type.
Oh, okay, right.
Did you ever read King of Comedy? Did you ever read the biography on Jerry Lewis?
No, but I've seen that movie a zillion times.
No. This is this was the biography.
No, I didn't.
About Jerry. Oh, read it. It's fascinating. Basically, somebody found Jerry's receipts for what he had spent in that time. That was a big part of the thing, and what he spent money on it. And the amount of money that Jerry Lewis was getting at that time, it dwarfs anything that anybody else is getting now. I mean, he was so rich, and he just spent. He just got it and spent. And so, I mean, I'm not saying he was broke or anything like that, but towards the end of his career, you go like 10, 15 years, without it working. I mean, we did talk about King of Comedy. Not King of Comedy, The Day the Clown Cried. His ill-fate.
Oh yeah. We're all waiting for having a rough cut of that to come out.
Well, I don't think it'll happen.
Yeah, I know.
I got to tell you, I'm torn on that. I love Harry Shearer's work, but he was the one who kind of opened up this can of worms with the Spy article, 30 years ago, where he said Jerry Lewis took me into his thing and showed me a copy of the film, and goes on to decimate it, right? But Jerry Lewis had already done that. Jerry Lewis had bought all the copies up, had, basically locked it, publicly said, it was a mistake. I've made a mistake. This isn't, he bought it back. He paid for it. He lost money on it to make sure it wouldn't get out, and I just think it's just like, what are we all getting out of making fun of this movie that basically, 30 years later, what's his name? Roberto, did the same thing. Yeah. Life is Beautiful, he did the exact same thing. Maybe he did it better. Maybe he did it with more, I've never understood. I thought Jerry got like a bad rap on that because he tried to,
Yeah, he wasn't the one like going, you must put out my movie. He's like,
he wasn't saying it was great.
No one ever see this. Again.
And then Harry Shearer goes, and it's quite possibly the worst. Yes, we know. He said,
yeah, even Jerry knows.
Yeah, right. So I've never understood. There's a sort of snarkiness that in the comedy community that I don't understand. Of like,
well, it's a Freudian of seeing someone's failures and like, oh, yeah, genius in France. What about this?
Yeah, it's like, and he did do one. He was I didn't know him that well, but I did work with him every day for like a week, and it was really fascinating, to kind of just be that close up to somebody and you see like, he could be really funny. He could be really mean. He would like go up to these women who had been working for him for 30 years. They were like in their 60s and, with the air horn. Oh, Jerry, so funny.
Was it because they were working with him? They have to go, Jerry, that's hilarious. You're so funny, Jerry.
Telling Jerry he's the funniest person in the world once in a while.
And what was that, a guy coming from like New Jersey and then find yourself, years later being with a Jerry Lewis?
So much of this has been like surreal for me because I really didn't plan on doing any of it. I just got very fortunate and got to work with, like people like Mitch Hurwitz, who of course, we'd worked on just about everything together. And then one day he's like, hey, I've written a script, for Ron Howard. I've done like 30 drafts of it. And he hands me Arrested Development. And I'm like, yeah, I got to get on this. I was doing My Wife and Kids at the time, the Damon Wayans show. It was like, the joke is Jim left his wife and kids. I left my wife and kids to do Arrested Development, which I did. But that was just luck for me, and also like that show was like so much about casting. I mean, like for something to work, like a lot of things have to work, maybe one or two things can be off or wrong. But, if let's say on Seinfeld, if they did cast Craig Bierko or whatever, it might not have worked. Why is Kramer so bigger and, better looking? Like everything has to work. I mean, that show really, without Julia Dreyfus, that show doesn't work as well. I think they all admit that, and they didn't have Julia Dreyfus on I have a copy of the pilot without Julia Dreyfus.
Was there a female lead in it or
No.
just three dudes?
Yeah, it was just three dudes,
Yeah. That dynamic's just, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like other white women,
Yeah.
So, write Larry David and, make it a woman, right? Which is kind of what he did. Like that's kind of been the surreal stuff for me because, like I said, in the 80s, I lived in the same building and I knew Larry David and Kenny Kramer and they did live across the hall from each other.
Yeah, Kenny Kramer gives the Seinfeld tours now in New York.
Yeah. A sweet guy, and he was a stand-up too. The whole thing, it's not work what I do, it's I've never been in a room going, oh, when can I get home? It's like, you're sitting around with funny people making jokes all day.
And what were you taking your inspirations from for, when scripting or just in the early days of Arrested Development?
We all thought that the show was going to get canceled next week. So we were, Mitch was like, let's just get as much as we possibly can because they're going to cancel us, and, at least the first batch, the first 3 years, we just looked up, but, it was, Mitch basically had two rules. Like everybody has to have a story, in 22 minutes, which no one has done with this many characters. It's way better if the story can overlap and connect. It's like, nice to connect those dominoes. And let's not try to do jokes that we've seen a million times, And, back then it's just like, I remember the idea of like, wait a minute, we're going to put a blue handprint on the wall. And then in the next episode, without acknowledging it, we'll just see the blue handprint still, like that was, what the heck? Everything was like, oh, they're so afraid. And, there had been single camera comedies. I mean, in the 60s, those are all single camera comedies, with laugh tracks and whatnot. But it's just like a bunch of things went right. Mitch just came up with these insane characters and I knew totally who they were all based on. And then, the casting was just amazing. I mean, Jessica Walter had never been funnier, had never, like who knew that she could be, because she always had to play nice, and all of a sudden she's playing not nice. And it's like, yes, that's you. Right. And Bateman at that time was just, his career was on a downswing. Downside, he said, I got a call back for this, and I got a call back from Verizon being the, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now guy? So, I mean,
Yeah, and he's the glue of the whole show. I mean, the power of the straight man. Everything. Cementing everything,
Yeah, there's no like, but all of them are good. There's not a bad note into it. Then David Schwartz brings this great fun music in to every scene, and then we luck out. He hires the Russo brothers. Mitch hires the Russo brothers, and basically it was like, yeah, they're good, but we get an extra camera. Oh, that's great, because one of them will always carry the camera. Oh, a free cameraman, because there were a lot of 2-camera shots, and they were just so good at, like, a lot of these documentary shows. You cut to the guy and he says his line. The Russo brothers, the guy begins saying his line, and the Russo brothers try to find him. So it looks a lot more improvisational than it is. It's the cameraman that doesn't know the script. You know what I mean? So that's why that show had that feel, towards the end. I mean, it was just, and we would look at it and we would go, is it, we would be like, hey, because we had done so much television, which was like, nice, comedy, we did a lot of sitcoms, a lot of multicams, and the Golden Girls, to me, had genuine, real, serious belly laughs in it, and a couple of other shows. John Larroquette, I'm very proud of doing that show that you can't find anywhere. Then I did some sweet shows, and I did, some Brotherly Love, and I'm happy with that show, but it had like kids in it. So I was like, I don't want to do dirty humor for kids. I was so wrong. I should have made it as filthy as I possibly could. But then to actually come across something and saying, hey, this is really making me laugh, and
did it feel a lot more freeing than other, like, the previous sitcoms you worked on, to work on Arrested Development?
No, because we always felt we were about to get fired.
Oh, it's like,
oh yeah,
the last hurrah.
Yeah, no. The network wouldn't. We never got, like, the show's really funny. We got like, you're 8 minutes over. We'll let you be 2 minutes over in your first cut, but you can't be 8 minutes over. And they were, I get it. Like I never felt that they, when the show got awards, that's what saved us. It's like, well, we won Best Comedy. You can't cancel a show that's just won Best Comedy. Although they tried. They definitely tried. The word I heard is Rupert Murdoch was not a fan of the show. And I'm like, good. Who can? Yeah. Rupert Murdoch. Oh, there's a guy on there's turning it out of here.
Right. Here we go. What elements do you think makes a perfect Arrested Development sketch, just in broad stroke terms?
The episodes that work the best is, the ones that have all the cast members, if the story totally works. Like, it's so funny. Like, Mitch and I were, he threw a little party for me the other night because it was my birthday, and we're talking around, and somebody said something along this line, like, I was eating at this restaurant called Mother's, and I went, Mother's? And he went, Mother's? I go, who would name a restaurant Mother's? I mean, don't you want like a positive association when you're coming up with a name for a Mother's? You want us to go to a place where, you're abusive? And we just like went into like an Arrested Development run, and I do think that we had that, he's got that sense of humor of this, like, yeah, that hasn't been done yet. I don't think that particular joke has been done yet. It's probably out there somewhere, but it's not like a trope yet. Like, let's use something like that. So, but like a perfect episode where there's all this stuff, happens and you laugh your ass off. Once a character has made his audience laugh, they like that character. The whole thing about unlikable characters is like, it doesn't matter if they make the character laugh. The old lady on Golden Girls, if you just have to live with her, she's not a likable person. She insults you. She insults your size. And you're ugly. But she makes you laugh, so that makes her likable, in my book.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I think that we use that. And then if there's just, like, Will Arnett could break your heart, because his whole character is so insecure. He's like the neglected son. He should be the smart son. He's not. Jason's the smart son. The kid breaks your heart. The only person who can never break your heart is the old lady, Jessica. But she was our villain. Yeah, she's the reason why everyone's so fucked up, in my opinion.
Yeah. So just a few last questions here. Like, broad stroke term, what do you think either Arrested Development's places in comedy history or your place in comedy history?
Oh, I have no place in comedy history. That's a ridiculous, absurd question.
Wait, haven't we just talked about it the whole hour?
Well, I have a few stories, but like, trust me, I'm not going to write a book, and I'm not going to, I'm doing this because I also like you. I'm a fan of your works, but I remember, like, when we did put like a lot of time, especially Mitch, because he just not, he not only wrote it, he basically was on set for most of the shooting, and then most importantly in editing. Because not that I'm not knocking editors, but your show's gonna be as funny as your editor. And have you ever met an editor? They're not the funniest guys in the world. So sometimes they might not take the right take. They use sometimes they'll take a broad take or something like that. And I think a lot of showrunners just go, "Oh, I don't want to deal with editing because it's so repetitive and it's so, mind-numbingly boring." But that's where you get the jokes. And and there would be like take 5 frames off, put 2 back on. I mean, that's how attuned Mitch was in editing. So, but I would say what Arrested will be is I think I as we were writing it, I would say this show might not ever get a giant audience, but people who this will be. People who want to get into comedy, this will be their favorite show. This will be the show that helps them say, "Oh my God, I can do that. Oh, I didn't see that coming. I didn't see that coming." Or, "Wow, what a great way of doing that." And that has kind of proven to be true. I know a lot of young writers who are like, "Oh my God, Arrested." And it's like, good, it's done its job. It's indoctrinated another person into comedy. And right now I sit back and I can watch, comedy has gotten much better. I mean, the hard comedy jokes, the multicam things, we made about 1 million of them. Maybe it's time we put that formula to rest, or find a new way of doing it. But if Arrested has a legacy, it's going to be like it inspired a lot of good comedy writers.
Jim, thank you so much. I hate the stories, and it was good to catch up with you.
You too, pal. All right. This was fun. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it as well. Take care, my friend.
Okay, you too, pal. Bye.
Bye. And that wraps up our episode today on Comedy History 101. I believe you got schooled in comedy. Once again, the quick plug, on Tuesday, July 15th at Pete's Candy Store, come out and see my play, The Roast of Graham Parsons. And find out more on my site, harmonleon.com, or follow me on Instagram at harmonleon. Also, show some support for Comedy History 101. Give us a few stars on iTunes, write a splendid review, or comment on our site, comedyhistory101.com. And until next time, bye-bye.
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
I'm trying to use the phone!
Comedy History 101.